So under what circumstances can I lose my U.S. permanent residence? How can my green card, my permanent residence, be revoked by the government? I know I've recorded many videos on losing U.S. citizenship, so I've received so many comments from all of you about, okay, we understand how this all works for U.S. citizens, but what about us? What about permanent residents? We know we also have rights to live and permanently reside in the U.S. There may be lesser rights than U.S. citizens, but under what circumstances can we lose those rights? In this video, I'm going to cover this topic in detail and kind of go over all the reasons for which permanent residence may be revoked and how the process works and sort of general considerations based on years of sort of practical experience seeing these cases. First and foremost, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian Pandev. I'm an attorney who helps foreign nationals navigate the U.S. legal system, and I hope that with these videos I make your life a little bit easier to understand all of the rules that govern a foreign national's life inside the U.S. Also, thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. If you like the content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me. It really helps me, and I really appreciate all of your kind comments on the past videos. It's been really encouraging me to record more of these, so I really appreciate you all. That being said, let's jump right into the topic of the day, which is green card revocations and the loss of permanent residence. So the million-dollar question I get from everyone is, under what circumstances can I lose my permanent residence? So let's go through them one by one. So the first one is fraud and misrepresentation. You've heard me say this over and over in every video. If you have lied in your immigration applications in the past, not just necessarily your permanent residence, application, but just generally if it comes out at a later stage after your green card was approved, after you became a permanent resident, that you lied, right? You falsified documents, or you had a fake marriage, or you did not disclose criminal convictions or immigration violations, or had a criminal record that you did not disclose. If the government finds out later, they can in fact revoke your permanent residence because you committed fraud or serious misrepresentations. The question I get all the time is, oh, what if I omitted something minor? For example, I forgot that I had a speeding ticket 20 years before I became a permanent resident. I forgot to disclose that. Does that mean that now the government is going to revoke my permanent residence? The answer probably is no for minor things. Again, for the government to take such a serious action, because the government understands that taking someone's permanent residence is a very serious act. And for them to do so, it generally means that something serious was done, right? So when we talk about fraud and misrepresentation, it's usually material fraud and misrepresentation. However, unlike with denaturalization, which I covered in other videos, when it comes to losing your permanent residence, technically the government can revoke your green card even for minor falsehoods and misrepresentations, because if it was anything that would have or could have led the officer to not approve your permanent residence application, they can revoke it. So unlike with denaturalization, where you have to prove to a clear and convincing evidentiary standard that there was truly a material omission, the standard is significantly lower for permanent residents. Now, I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I just want to be honest about this, that when it comes to fraud and misrepresentations, if there's one thing the U.S. government absolutely hates, is being lied to. So if it later comes out that you lied about something significant, especially crimes, especially major immigration violations, and the government finds out at a later date, those are the cases where I see them starting the revocation process. So the next big reason why someone's permanent residence may be revoked is criminal convictions. If you commit an aggravated felony, so these are serious offenses, think of drug-related crimes, especially drug trafficking, violent crimes like murder, rape, assault with, deadly weapon, etc. If you commit an aggravated felony, you can, in most cases, be deported from the US. So if you're found to have committed these crimes, you've been found and convicted, you're found to be guilty, after your criminal sentencing, so say you go to prison and serve time in prison for your criminal offense, you will likely be placed in ICE custody, and then the immigration authorities will initiate deportation proceedings against you. Now, however, even if you've committed less serious crimes than aggravated felonies, you could still end up having to fight to maintain your permanent residence. So certain other crimes that are considered vile and depraved and against sort of the moral standards of society can also lead to and be treated as a deportable offense. These are called CIMTs, crimes involving moral turpitude. And especially having multiple of these convictions on your record could lead to the government pursuing the revocation of your permanent residence, as well as initiating deportation proceedings against you. If you're wondering which crimes are CIMTs, crimes involving moral turpitude, generally theft, fraud, assaults fall into this category that we see regularly, DUIs. The bottom line with when it comes to criminal convictions in immigration is that they're very state and sort of circuit specific. So what that means is, depending on the specific statute in your specific jurisdiction where you live, the consequences of certain crimes can be very different. So if you've been convicted of a crime as a permanent resident, and it's a more serious crime, so I'm not talking a simple speeding ticket or a parking ticket, I'm talking real crimes which come with serious punishments, you should definitely be speaking to an immigration lawyer to understand the consequences and how they may impact your green card. The bottom line is, especially serious crimes are a driving main reason for the government to try to revoke someone's permanent residence. So the next big reason that I see people lose their permanent residence for is abandonment. So abandoning your permanent residence. So what does this mean? Abandonment is the idea that a permanent resident is expected to reside within the physical boundaries of the United States. So if you are spending the majority of your time or you're predominantly living abroad, the government can hold that, hey, you don't really want to be a permanent resident. You are always outside the country. So by spending all that time outside the country, you abandon your permanent residence. The way I generally describe this, because people always ask me, Adrian, but how much time is too much time outside, and when should I be worried about abandonment? The way I look at it is, if you're spending 6 months out of a calendar year inside the US, I don't think you have much to worry about when it comes to abandonment. If you're spending more than half the year here, I think it's fairly clear that this is your home, you permanently reside here, and you're allowed to travel and spend time abroad. I know, obviously, any immigrant, any permanent resident is going to have some ties outside the country. I know, especially, for example, many Europeans like to spend summers with family in Europe, on beaches, etc. That's completely normal, and I don't think you should stop doing that. Where I see issues is when people start spending a lot of time outside the country. And what I mean by a lot of time is more than 6 months out of the year, and taking trips that are, a year or longer outside the country and then trying to re-enter. And what I see is that this whole abandonment process usually starts when an individual tries to re-enter the country. So what will happen is, someone's a permanent resident, they leave the country, they don't come back for 2 years, and when they try to come back after 2 years, they show up at customs. Customs sees, hey, we see that the last time you were here was 2 years ago, and that's when they start asking questions, and that's when the customs officers can actually refer the case to immigration court to start the whole abandonment proceeding and to determine whether the individual should keep their permanent residence. Although this is rare because it's a lot of work for customs, it can happen. The other place where I see people lose their permanent residence for abandonment is when they try to apply for a re-entry permit after being outside the country for a very long time. So basically, they leave the country, they assume they're going to come back, but they don't, and then they apply for a re-entry permit at a local consulate embassy, and when they go to that appointment, that application is denied, and at that point they've lost their permanent residence because they have no document to re-enter because the consular officer made the determination that they had abandoned their permanent residence. And then finally, when you apply to renew your green card, so if you have a 10-year green card, for example, you apply 9.5 months before to renew it, USCIS can also review your travel history to determine whether or not you abandoned your permanent residence. To be really honest, the way I see this playing out in most cases is the most common one I see is by far the consular one. I see less issues at renewing your green card and less issues at customs, but they can happen. And the bottom line is basically, if you're spending too much time outside the United States, you should be talking to an attorney to make a plan on how you can address that period outside the country. It's very normal to get job offers to be placed outside for a few years. There's ways to work around that, but you have to plan ahead and have a strategy in place. Don't just leave for 3 years and try to come back and then have issues in doing so. The next big reason for losing one's permanent residence has to do with the I-751 form. So basically, if you filed for a marriage-based green card, but you weren't married for 2 years when your initial green card application was approved, you're going to receive a 2-year green card. It's called a conditional green card, conditional permanent residence. Before the end of that 2-year period, you have to go ahead and file what's called a Form I-751 removal of conditions application. And in that application, you again have to prove that your marriage was valid at the time you received your green card. Now, if your I-751 petition is not approved, then the government your green card's already expired at this point because you had a 2-year green card, so that's already expired, and the government can, in fact, initiate, deportation proceedings against you. So I want to flag this. I think most people are aware that if they have a conditional green card, they have to file the removal of conditions petition, that I-751. But it's something serious. Don't take it lightly. Yes, it's probably a bit less work than an I-130 petition, like your initial petition to receive a marriage-based green card. But don't take it lightly. It's a serious application process, petition process, and make sure you submit all the relevant evidence so you don't end up losing your permanent residence because you didn't submit sufficient evidence of your marriage. And then finally, the last two grounds for losing your permanent residence are security grounds. So think of terrorism, national security risk. If you're deemed to be a national security risk, your green card can be revoked. Or on the public charge ground, so becoming a public charge, basically if you receive for an extended period of time long-term government benefits, then you could be deemed to be a public charge and your green card can be revoked. I don't want to go too in depth about these last two categories simply because they're quite rare. They're significantly less common than the other ones I described, but know that it's a possibility. So for the security related ground, basically don't do anything that could jeopardize U.S. national security. If you haven't done anything wrong and have been accused of something like this, it's extremely serious. Please talk to an attorney, not just immigration lawyer, probably criminal defense lawyer too, if you're accused of anything like that. But yeah, you will definitely need help. It's super serious. And then with the public charge ground, the same, right? If you're accused of taking benefits for a prolonged period, long-term government benefits that you shouldn't be receiving as a permanent resident, and the government wants to revoke your permanent residence, definitely speak to someone and obtain help. Again, these last two ones, in my experience, are significantly rarer. Now, so this is a great segue to talk about how the revocation process actually works. So there's two separate processes that come into play. There is the rescission process, so rescinding someone's permanent residence. And then there's removal proceedings. Think of it as deportation proceedings, because permanent residents can be deported in certain circumstances because they're not U.S. citizens. Even though they're permanent residents, they're still considered foreign nationals in the U.S. who are deportable under certain circumstances. So let's talk about rescission first. So what rescission is It's a process in which the government can, 5 years after issuance of permanent residence, so 5 years from the start date on someone's permanent resident card, the government can rescind that permanent resident card if they discover that they made an error. So for example, they find out that you didn't disclose certain information, right? So you misrepresented. Or for example, they discover that they should have never approved your permanent residence application and it was the officer's mistake. 5 years after you obtaining permanent residence, the government can in fact still rescind that decision. Now, I know many of you are, I completely understand that people are worried about this when a lawyer puts it this way, right? That in essence, you're not safe until 5 years after you've obtained permanent residence. But to be clear, this happens if there's an error, if there's a major significant material omission, right? The government is not looking to just reopen past cases, and in doing so, within this rescission process, they have to send a letter to the individual that explains why they're reopening the permanent residence case and why they want to rescind and revoke that green card. And obviously, the individual has a right to respond to that letter and put up a defense and explain why they should not lose their permanent residence. So, while this can happen, it is rare, and it only happens where all of a sudden the government discovers that this individual should have never been a permanent resident. So I don't want anyone watching this to think that, oh, this is super common and the government just randomly reopens permanent residence cases. That is not my experience at all. Usually there's a reason, and the reasons I see is a misrepresentation, especially crimes and prior immigration violations. I see that a lot. And sometimes I see where there was a technical sort of legal barrier to someone becoming a permanent resident that the officer was unaware of, and then they discover it later, and because they realized that it was a mistake and the individual should have never become a permanent resident, now the government wants to rescind the green card because of their own mistake. And I know this is unfair, but that's just how the rules are written. So removal proceedings operate quite differently from rescission. So the way removal proceedings operate is that the government files a document called a notice to appear with the immigration court. So USCIS or ICE will file this document with an immigration court, and then by doing so, the government initiates removal proceedings against someone, and removal is the same as deportation. So basically, the government initiates a deportation case against that permanent resident. Where I see removal used more than rescission is mainly with crimes, so especially aggravated felonies, even CIMTs, crimes involving moral turpitude. So after sentencing or after serving your sentence in the criminal case, the case gets referred to ICE, and then ICE goes ahead and files the NTA, the notice to appear, with the immigration court. So very often I see removal proceedings when a permanent resident commits crimes. The other one is abandonment. So when it comes to abandoning your permanent residence, generally the final determination on that will be made by an immigration judge, unless you sign a document saying that you've officially abandoned your permanent residence beforehand. Only an immigration judge can truly rule on that. So what'll happen is that customs officer that you speak with when you enter the country after many years outside, or if that USCIS officer that doesn't want to approve your renewal of your permanent residence, will refer the case to immigration court, where there will be a removal hearing in front of an immigration judge, where you can prove that you did not in fact abandon your permanent residence. So in addition to this, the government isn't limited to use the removal process only in the case of crimes and abandonment. So say they realize that you committed fraud or misrepresentation more than 5 years ago. So say 10 years ago you lied on your immigration applications, and they discover it 10 years later. At that point, the rescission process can no longer be used because it's too far out. The government still has the right to bring a removal case against you for that. So you're, in essence, never off the hook if you lied. So there's an exception to this rule in the Third Circuit, which is New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. In these states, the government cannot bring, after 5 years, so after the rescission window, the government cannot bring a removal case against someone where they discover eligibility issues prior to them becoming a permanent resident. So what this means is, say you misrepresented, or say you didn't do anything wrong, but the officer made a mistake and you should have never become a permanent resident. And they discover this mistake after 5 years from you becoming a permanent resident. So let's just, for our example's sake, say 10 years after you become a permanent resident, the government discovers that they shouldn't have approved your permanent residence application because you were ineligible 10 years ago. In these 3 states, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, the government cannot bring a removal case just because of that eligibility issue prior to you becoming a permanent resident. In all other states, the government can always bring that removal case no matter how many years later. So this is a very specific exception. But keep in mind, this only has to do with your eligibility at the time of becoming a permanent resident. So if you later lie in your naturalization application, or you commit a crime, or you abandon your permanent residence, you can still be placed in removal proceedings even in those 3 states. So this is just a quirky exception when it comes to rescission and removal proceedings in those 3 states. So now another thing I want to mention, because it's important, right? I understand that videos like this can make someone anxious, right? Because you may be worried about something in the past, or there may be some kind of error that was made in your immigration application. The bottom line is this: if the government is going to try to revoke your permanent residence, there's a formal process to this. So it's not just a letter that says, hey, as of yesterday, we took away your permanent residence. That's not how it works. So when it comes to rescission, you're going to receive a letter from USCIS generally, and you will have the opportunity to respond with evidence and present your own case, right? So there is a formal process of defending yourself. And then with removal proceedings, I would argue there's an even more formalized process, because there's there's several hearings. You have to appear in front of an immigration judge. You have to plead in immigration court. Then you will at some point have an individual hearing on the matter, where you will present your case and put up your defense in front of an immigration judge, who will decide whether or not you should maintain your permanent residence. So a couple of final tips about all of this, and then your main takeaways should be. So number one, even though videos like this are probably scary, my advice is to not worry about all of this if you don't fall into one of those categories I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So the bottom line is, yes, permanent residents do lose their permanent residence occasionally, but the majority do not, right? Most people do not commit crimes that lead to deportation. Most permanent residents do not abandon their permanent residence. They live in the U.S. Most don't lie and have not committed, fraud or misrepresentation. And USCIS officers generally don't make major mistakes that would lead to the revocation of someone's permanent residence. So my goal with this video is not to scare you at all, but just to provide an explanation for people who've been asking me these questions. Now, if you find yourself in one of those scenarios, so for example, you right now got a job offer and you have to move to, I'm just going to make this up, Paris for 2 years. You should be talking to an immigration lawyer if you want to maintain your permanent residence, because if you're going to be spending the majority of 2 years outside the country, that can impact your permanent residence. You don't want to abandon it. Also, it could also impact your ability to naturalize and prove continuous residence. So the bottom line is, if you're going to be spending a lot of time outside the country, talk to an immigration lawyer, make a plan, right? Similarly, if you've committed crimes, you've been convicted of a serious crime recently, and you're worried about how it may impact your permanent residence, speak to an immigration lawyer. Generally speaking, good criminal defense lawyers, especially when it comes to more serious offenses, they involve immigration lawyers in the criminal defense to make sure that you don't plead to any serious offenses that, although may help you in your criminal sentencing, could lead to your losing of your permanent residence due to those crimes. So the bottom line is similar advice with any criminal convictions. Involve a lawyer, plan around it, protect yourself while you're defending yourself in criminal court, or if you haven't done that afterwards, know your rights and understand what you can and cannot do and what may happen, right? Then regarding, omissions or any sort of material misrepresentations, frankly, similar with, national security grounds and public charge rule-related issues, generally, the way these cases come up is you get that letter in the mail and you find out, unfortunately, through a letter that the government is trying to revoke your permanent residence. When that happens, and not just in these cases, but all cases, right, you should immediately be speaking to a lawyer. I always tell, individuals I speak with that there's very many cases in immigration law where you don't necessarily need a lawyer. I would not say this is one of them. If you want to maintain your permanent residence and someone, more precisely the government, is trying to revoke it, my advice is get the best help you can and put up a defense, because if you're removed or if your permanent residence is rescinded, you're going to be in a very tough spot where it's going to make it very difficult for you to live in this country, right? So it's a tremendous burden and a very big punishment that you would be taking. So make sure that you put up the strongest defense you can. Anyway, that is all I got on this topic. I hope you found this video helpful. If you do, please like it. Please follow the channel. It's really appreciated and it really, really helps me. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about this, post it in the comment section of this video. And what I will do is I will try to record more videos commenting on those and answering more questions. And I'll do my best to record as many as I can. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.